Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Women in Iran have taken to the streets, leading protests, burning their headscarves, and clashing with the police. Today, let's discuss why Iranian women are burning their hijabs and protesting against their government. You can find the full transcript of today's episode over on the Thinking in English blog. Follow me on Instagram for more content, and leave a like, review or rating wherever you are listening today. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Morality. Technology's morality is determined by its political or social use. Hijab. The head covering that some Muslim women wear when they are outside. For example, Iranian law requires women to wear a hijab while in public. To spark. To cause the start of something. For example, the visit of Donald Trump sparked mass demonstrations. Unrest. Disagreements or fighting between different groups of people, as in, it is feared that the civil unrest in that country could lead to war. Zealot. A person who has very strong opinions about something and tries to make other people have them too. For example, he is a religious zealot. To detain. To force someone to officially stay in a place. For example, a suspect has been detained by the police for questioning. Outage. A period when a service such as electricity is not available. As in, the radio news reported power outages affecting 50 homes. Decisively. Quickly, effectively, and confidently. Such as, if they had acted more decisively, they could have saved him. Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old student from the city of Saqqez in Iran, died on September 16th after spending 3 days in a coma. She was spending time with her brother in the capital city Tehran when she was stopped and arrested by the Iranian morality police. The police accused her of breaking Iran's strict laws on women's clothing. Women are required to fully cover their hair with a type of headscarf known as a hijab, and fully cover their arms and legs with loose clothing. According to some reports, Mahsa was wearing a looser style of headscarf. Witnesses report that Mahsa was beaten by the morality police. Acting UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, has stated that they targeted her head with batons and smashed her body into cars. Mahsa collapsed into a coma shortly after arriving at the detention center and passed away a few days later. Iran's government and police force rejected accusations that she died from injuries and instead suggested she suffered from sudden heart failure. Mahsa's family say she was young, healthy and fit. They say her death was not accidental, it was murder. Mahsa's death sparked protests across Iran. Women are at the front of these protests, leading the crowds of angry citizens. Women are burning their hijabs in the streets, cutting their hair, and dancing in public, all things restricted by Iran's strict religious laws. The Iranian police have responded with brutality, shooting and killing a number of protesters. But the unrest is continuing and spreading. Most of Iran's 31 provinces have experienced some kind of protesting in the past week. Around 35 people have been killed in the violence, and there are clashes still ongoing in a number of cities. Social media videos that have been posted online appear to show Iranian police and security forces using live ammunition, or real guns, against protesters, who have responded with petrol bombs. In one northwestern province, 739 people were arrested in one day, and reports are emerging that those arrested have been beaten and kept in appalling conditions. It is important to understand that while the trigger, the immediate cause of the current protests, was the death of Mahsa Amini, Iranians' anger is the result of 40 years of incredibly strict religious policies, with these policies hitting Iranian women hardest. One of my listeners from Iran, who I won't name for their safety, described it to me in this way. It's not just about the hijab. The hijab has sparked this anger over tyranny and oppression inflicted on Iranians for more than 40 years. In 1979, Iran underwent what is known as the Islamic Revolution. The dictatorship of the Shah was overthrown and replaced with an Islamic theocracy. Above the country's president sits a supreme leader, a religious leader, who holds virtually all power in the country. Before 1979, Iran was a dictatorship with a terrible human rights record. But under the Shah, Iranians had a larger degree of personal freedom. Iran was not always an ultra-conservative Islamic country. In the 1930s, the most conservative Islamic veils were actually banned, and headscarves removed from women. Iran was a close ally of both Britain and the US, and this Western culture spread into the country. It wasn't uncommon to see Iranian women in tight-fitting clothes like jeans, miniskirts, or short-sleeved tops. Everything changed in 1979. The new Islamic government, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, imposed a compulsory dress code for women. The hijab, which was once banned in Iran, was now mandatory. Women had to cover their hair at all times while in public. The Western outfits and tight-fitting clothing were prohibited. During the revolution, one of the slogans adopted by supporters of the new Islamic system was "cover or suffer." Women were openly threatened if they did not follow the new regulations. It has been 4 decades since the Islamic Revolution, and things have not improved for Iranian women. If anything, the social restrictions have become even stricter. Iran's current leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is aging, and while they search for a replacement, policies have become increasingly harsh. Slightly more moderate Iranian officials and politicians have been removed from government, and religious zealots have been put in charge of all important parts of society. One of these zealots, President Ebrahim Raisi, passed a new policy known as Hijab and chastity. The Iranian morality police have been reinvigorated by this new decree. Cafes playing music have been forced to replace songs with instrumental music, as singing is seen as sinful. Posters of women without Islamic veils have been removed, and hundreds of women have been arrested and detained by groups of men. These men, the morality police, wear black and carry batons. It is these men who beat and killed Mahsa, and there are many many women, like Mahsa, punished for not following the strict dress code perfectly in public. Iran has become more technological. There are plans to introduce facial recognition software in train stations to record, identify, and track down women not wearing a veil in public. And recently, the Iranian version of Uber, a taxi app called Snap, has begun allowing drivers to report passengers to the morality police. Aside from restrictions on clothing, Iran's general human rights situation is abysmal. According to Amnesty International, in 2021 alone, thousands of Iranians were arrested, interrogated, and detained simply for peacefully demonstrating. Protests are regularly crushed using lethal force and illegal weapons. Women and minorities have their freedom heavily restricted. They are regularly discriminated against and subjected to violence. Rights to freedom of religion, access to the internet, sexual and reproductive rights, and freedom of speech are all undermined. Iran regularly uses torture in prisons and detention centres. Prisoners are kept in unsafe conditions without access to medical care, toilets, or beds. And aside from prison, trials are unfair, and punishments for breaking religious rules can include floggings, amputations, and blinding. For decades, Iranians have lived under a violent and unforgiving government. The government not only has some of the strictest religious rules in the world, but they also crack down on any protest or unrest. It is against this background that Iranians have chosen to protest and rebel. Iran has no independent broadcast media. Everything you see on TV or hear on radio is from the government. There is never any criticism of the state or the leaders. So, if a protester wants to share their voice and their opinions, they only have one choice: the internet. And Iran knows this. For the past week, internet access in Iran has been heavily limited. Instagram and WhatsApp are usually two of the only Western social media apps allowed by the country. But this week they have been blocked. What is unusual about the current internet outage is that even people using VPNs or proxies are unable to access the outside world. Millions of Iranians rely on these two platforms to communicate with the outside world. In fact, I have many Iranian listeners who use Instagram to communicate with me. Multiple Iranians messaged me this week, requesting I use my podcast to explain the situation in Iran to the world. And hopefully I can also help Iranians to develop the skills to talk about the situation in English. The current protests are largely organized over social media. With internet access shut down, it has become much more difficult for large-scale unrest to develop. It is also harder for Iranian women to share their stories online and communicate the situation to the rest of the world. According to the BBC's disinformation unit, shutting down internet connections is an effective tool that severely harms the ability of protesters to organize, communicate, and inform the outside world. But it also carries a huge cost for the Iranian economy, businesses, and public services. Despite this, Iran has shown throughout the past 4 decades that they care more about controlling the people than they care about economic success. The sad reality is that it's unlikely Iran will back down to the protesters. In fact, the opposite may be likely. President Raisi promised to deal decisively with the unrest. The police have already killed, arrested, and beaten multiple protesters. The internet has been blocked, and Iran will sacrifice their economic success to keep its strict control over people. Iran has also dealt with large protests before. In 2019, rising fuel prices triggered the most violent protests in the history of the Islamic Republic. During that time, internet was taken down for many days. And the Islamic leaders of Iran benefited from a revolution in 1979. They know the mistakes made by the Shah's government then, and are making steps to not follow in his footsteps. As such, Iran always takes an aggressive stance with protest. And experts suggest that the government only needs 500,000 loyal supporters to control the 80 million citizens of the country. Iran will probably not liberalize their clothing restrictions. And once the protests and violence subside, normal Iranians will be living in fear once again. One mistake, one broken rule, could leave them open to arrest, beatings, or even death. So here is today's final thought. The purpose of this episode was to explain what is happening in Iran to people all around the world. I have listeners in almost every country, and I believe it is important to highlight the situation facing Iranian women. Moreover, I wanted to help give Iranian listeners the vocabulary and English knowledge to explain what is happening in their country to people in other countries. I am a British guy living in Japan who has never been to Iran. When I see unrest around the world, I always want to help. I spent a year leading an Amnesty International chapter as a 20-year-old student. I've always been interested in human rights and protesting and demonstrating. But what can I do to help the Iranian people? Well, I can help give my Iranian listeners the tools to express their situation to people around the world. Without a voice, you can't be heard. And in our modern world, an English voice can spread much further. In fact, my next episode will be about protest language. There are protests all over the world all the time. Some for major things, some for minor things. But the language of protest is English. So next time, I think I will introduce protest language to you all. Share this episode, copy the explanations I gave, and borrow my words to talk about your own situations, and tell the world what is happening in Iran. But what do you think? What do you think the people of Iran should do? Let me know, or let us all know, in the comments on the blog, the comments on Spotify, or send me a message on Instagram if you want to be anonymous, and I will share it on for you. You can find the full transcript of this episode over on the Thinking in English blog. Please head over to my Instagram page as well. I post content there. Hopefully I'll try and become a bit more regular, but there is some good stuff already uploaded over there, and I always update my stories regularly. And if you really enjoy listening to Thinking in English, please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Patreon is a platform where you can support your favorite podcast. You can help me turn this into a job or part of a job in the future. On Patreon, in return for a small financial contribution, you can get excellent benefits, ranging from extra episodes, our weekly conversation club, which takes place on Tuesdays, twice a day on Tuesday, at 2 different time zones. So hopefully most people should be able to attend one session. Or if you're really love supporting Thinking in English, you can have conversations and classes with myself as well. So thank you all for listening. Today was a bit more of a serious topic, but an important topic. So I hope you all have a good week, and I will see you next time.